The TCG ban list has finally dropped, and not only am I going to give you guys my top 10 decks going into this next format, but I'm going to have some honorable mentions as well. But first, before we get into all that, please go grab yourself a cup of coffee or something. That way you guys can sit down and tune in. Let's do this. Alright, so a new ban list, a new format, a lot of the same stuff that's still going to be around. But before we dive into all these decks, I have to shout out my amazing sponsored Next Level Anime. This is by far one of the best up-and-coming apparel companies out there right now. They make all kinds of amazing custom apparel, hats, hoodies, shirts, you name it. If you're as big of an anime fan as me, this is definitely one of the best places to go. And plus, other shops would probably be charging you $30 or $40 for a shirt. But here, look at this, $15. You cannot get a better price. Plus, if you use my promo code, Cards&CoffeeTCG, you'll get 10% off of your purchase, plus a portion will go back to the channel, helping me make more videos for you. But with that out of the way, let's hop into the honorable mentions of this list. First, of course, Mystic Mine deck is still a thing. It's very shocking to see that this card went unchecked on the ban list, but maybe Konami really thinks this is the only card that's keeping a deck like Tearlament in check. Obviously, Mystic Mine is really frustrating to play against as a card, but when you start throwing in other floodgates, plus gaining life and stunning your opponent with all their other continuous spells, and if you don't have the out, then this could be a very annoying deck to play against. Shoot, even if you did draw the out, chances are they're going to probably be playing Solemn Judgment as well, and Dark Bribe and the like, so yeah, I definitely figured this should be an honorable mention, because this is definitely going to be a thing you can still run into, and don't be shocked if you see it floating around the top tables this format. To keep with the theme of the floodgate type decks, I think Eldritch would make another great honorable mention. By no means is this deck tier 1, but you could definitely tech this thing out, whether you're playing a bunch of floodgates or maybe even a Despia engine alongside it. This deck is really good at controlling the pace of the game, shutting your opponent out with floodgates, and of course, Golden Lord is one hell of a card that always comes back. Plus, it doesn't lose to Mystic Mine, so really it's not that bad of a meta call as well. Another deck that really hasn't seen too much play, but I still think is a very cool deck. Virtual World has definitely been one of the best decks of previous formats, and I definitely could see it making its way back in. Again, while I don't think this is a tier 1 deck, it's definitely something that you could pick up going into the format. The deck does have an in-engine Mystic Mine out with Chuche. Not only does this deck make amazing first turn boards and makes a Macrocosmos on legs in the form of Shen Shen, but it can also abuse the adventure package very easily, which is really great for going second. And of course, there is the lines where you can go into Baron de Fleur and Beatrice dumping Artifact Scythe and Scythe locking your opponent in the standby phase. This deck has a lot of options, and it's definitely something to keep your eye on. The last two honorable mentions on my list is Salamangreat and Marincess. Both of these decks play very similarly, where the Salad leans more to heavy OTKs and Marincess leads more towards a tower-esque kind of deck. They're both very similar play styles where they have a bunch of one-card starters. You can play a stack of hand traps in the deck, and I think not only are these decks great budget options, but in the right format, depending on what other people are teching to counter the top decks, these could fit in the meta very, very well. So that's it for my honorable mentions. There are probably some other decks I could have added, but I didn't want to make this a half-hour-long video. But hopping into my top 10, starting out at number 10 is Branded Despia. Branded Despia was one of the top decks last year, and for a very good reason. The deck hasn't really lost anything as well aside from Fairy Tale Snow, and you have a lot of options whether you want to play Tearlaments in it or you could even play the Predaplant engine. Mirror Jade is obviously a heck of a card right now, and any deck that can easily summon that monster obviously is in a winning position. Plus, with how the time rule is working right now, Masquerade is an amazing card in Game 3s. But all in all, depending on how you want to build the deck, I think Despia is really amazing. Again, the adventure package is also a tool this deck can use. But just know, Branded Despia, definitely one of the top 10 decks coming into the new format post-October ban list. Deck number 9 really didn't have that much of a showing, at least after Power of the Elements came out. Sky Striker is an amazing spell-based deck, and with the added support of Runics or even the new spellbook engine you can play in it with Judgment now legal, Striker has always been a very good Swiss Army-like deck. Depending how the format plays out, this deck can always change how it's built and how it's teched out. Some other notable things is, again, it can play the Adventure package, and of course now Destiny Fusion's at 3, which was really amazing in this deck. Only time will tell to see really how well this deck will perform, but this deck obviously has all the makings to be a very powerful deck coming into the next format, and for that reason I have Sky Striker as number 9. Now, number 8, I actually initially thought I might have put this higher, but until we see how this format plays out, I really think it's going to be on the lower end of the top 10. Rika Sun Avalon was obviously a great deck last format. It caught a lot of people off guard. Now the deck is getting a little more known, and of course people understand how to play against it. But post Banlist, this deck lost nothing, and it can put up some really insane going first boards. The mechanics of the Rikas are really unfair, and being able to abuse that alongside the free Sun Avalon spamming engine really makes for one of the most powerful decks that you could play going into this format. And some of the best attributes of this deck is not only do you get to abuse Mystic Mine, but you can abuse Rivalry of the Warlords as well. Any combo-based deck that gets to play Floodgates obviously has a very good shot in the meta, and this is a deck that really just abuses the best of both worlds, so for that reason I think Sun Avalon Rikas is coming in at number 8. Number 7 on my list is one of my favorite decks, but in the community it's kind of 50-50. Drytron just got its 3rd Ben 10 back, still no Eva, but this makes the deck so much more consistent, so much more explosive, and of course adds that much more to the grind game. Depending if hand traps are really going to be a thing this format, I still think this deck can compete very well. It has the ability to play through hand traps fairly easily, plus having Orange Light to stop some of the blowout cards like Droll and Lockbird. Not only that, but this deck can also abuse Vanity's Ruler or even play the Ammo Factor Pain, both options being very insane in the format today. But of course, when you're going Ammo Factor Pain, you're basically skipping their turn and not even giving them the chance to Dark Ruler you. It's pretty insane. And for that reason, I've made Drytron number 7. I personally think this deck is going to be really great this format. Plus, you get all the board breakers like Mystic Mine, Droplet, and Dark Ruler. It's pretty crazy. Deck number 6 on my list is the Exo Sister deck. Obviously, this deck performed very well at the end of last format. Again, this is very similar to the Sun Avalon deck, where I feel like the more people play against it and understand it, the less likely this deck is to succeed. But for what this deck can do, it really has all the makings to counter some of the best decks in the format, especially Tier Element. Not only does this deck revolve around you interacting with your graveyard, but of course it can play D-Shifter, which is an insane card right now. And while it doesn't have the highest ceiling in the game, I definitely think this is one of the best control decks going into this format. And depending how this format really shapes up, who knows, maybe it could be even higher on the list. Deck number 5 on my list is another control deck, which actually I was debating between this and Exo Sister for the 5 and 6 slot. Fluandereeze is obviously a really great deck, and of course, just like Exo Sister, you get to play Dimensional Shifter. While this deck, again, just like Exo Sister, doesn't have the highest ceiling in the world, this deck can be teched out to really accomplish whatever it needs to in the current format, and having a barrier statue and a skill drain all in one deck obviously can be annoying for, well, any deck really to have to combat. Plus, with the release of the Megatins, this deck just got that much cheaper, so don't be shocked if you see this deck at the top tables, because Fluandereeze honestly is a really good deck this format. Now we're getting to the top of the ladder here. Deck number 4, in my opinion, this format is gonna be Mathmech. There were multiple times last format that this deck proved itself, even with all these decks at an even higher power than it is now. Mathmech has a bunch of 1 and 2 card combos that really leads to some really insane first turn boards. Not only that, you get to stack your deck full of 10 to 15 hand traps to really combat whatever you think is in the meta. Plus, the deck is really great at going second. Access code is very easy to obtain. Heck, you could even splash an @Ignister engine in as well, not only helping contribute to all your combos, but it also makes it to where against something like Tearlament, if you put up your first turn towers, well, most of these decks really just don't main deck and out for it. Maybe I'm crazy, we'll see how the format shapes up, but if I had to guess, Mathmech is definitely one of the top 4 runners coming into this format. I think the deck's pretty insane. Now, deck number 3 could be considered an engine as well, but For the deck, I personally think Runics are really insane this format. Runic obviously is another control-based strategy, relying on its field spell to generate free card advantage and using your quick play spells to disrupt your opponent. There are a bunch of different ways you can build it, one we'll talk about a little bit later, but when you combine it with stuff like Mystic Mine and Floodgates, there are so many different ways you can just lock your opponent out of the game. And not only that, all your spell cards are going to be banishing your opponent's deck. So the longer we're sitting, the more likely you are to win, because most of these decks, while they have mine outs, if it gets banished, you know, it's going to be pretty rough. Again, Runic can also be used as an engine, but as far as the deck goes by itself, I really think it's a solid choice in this format. But all in all, while I don't think this deck is insanely broken, I definitely think with the right pilot and the right build, this deck is really insane. Because really, this deck reminds me a lot of Sky Striker, where it's just another toolbox deck that has an amazing win con that, well, it's really hard to play around in most meta contention. Now, that leads us to deck number 2, which should be really no surprise, and that's going to be Sprites. Yes, Sprites lost Ronin Tonin, which is very devastating for at least the resource game and the ease of making Totally Awesome. But if I'm completely honest, it's still very easy to go into Toad if that's the route you still want to go. Whether you're normaling Swap Frog and then summoning a bunch of level 2s or bringing Swap Frog off of the Gigantic, all you have to really do is make sure when you go to make your Elf, you leave the swap on field. That way you can use Elf to bring back the swap you just dumped. And there you go, 2 Aquas, there's your Toad. But if I'm completely honest, I don't know if Pure is going to be the route to go, and whether or not we play the frogs going forward, time will tell. But I personally think playing something like the Live Twin variant, or even the Runic build as well, makes for some really insane techie options for this deck that basically will accomplish the same thing. And again, even the Live Twins have a level 2 Aqua, so again, you can make Totally Awesome that way as well. But that being said, the Adventure Package is another thing you can play in this deck, which obviously leads to a bunch of Link 2s and Board Breakers, and obviously Griffin Rider is really amazing as well. But at the end of the day, Sprite is still just as strong as ever, and while you don't have as easy access to Toad, you still have so many options, and that's what really is going to make this deck, in my eyes, still number 2 of this format. Now, of course, number 1, best deck of the format in my eyes, which is probably no shocker to anybody. Tearlament is one of the best decks last format and will continue to be going into this one as well. Fairy Tail Snow is gonna be missed in this deck, but we still have a bunch of options for Curious to dump. Whether you're sending Zephyros to extend into rank 4s for the mirror match, maybe make a Abyss Dweller, or even just get access to your Gizmek, almost acting like a pseudo Snow. This deck has so many options and so many builds and so many variants that really just puts this deck above the rest. And of course, soon we will be getting the Ishizu support as well, which in my eyes is really gonna make this deck ascend to arguably a tier 0 status. This deck is gonna be insane. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We are gonna be getting some amazing support to counter this deck in Darkwing Blast, but I think I'm going to save that for another video. But that's all I have today for our top 10 decks of the format. If you think I missed a deck, please comment down below. Tell everybody what you think the next goo is. Also, with the new format, of course, I'm going to be profiling a bunch of these decks, so make sure you comment down below if there's one you want to see. And please don't forget to hop over to Next Level Anime to get yourself some gear. And of course, save yourself 10% by using my code Cards&CoffeeTCG. This format is looking to shape up to be a good one, and hopefully things won't be ruined by Mystic Mine. But until I see you guys next time, here's hoping to see you on the next video. Peace.